Hello and welcome. My name is Dominique. I am the founder of Start the Wave, an online community and non-profit organization focused on empowering, supporting, and uplifting positive change makers worldwide. We do that by funding action, amplifying voices that need to be heard, and encouraging growth, both through education and inner healing. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are all currently on various different Indigenous lands. I am in Montreal, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange for various different Indigenous peoples, including the Kanien'kehá:ka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabe. So thank you so much for joining us today for this crucial conversation around eco-spirituality. Eco-spirituality invites us to look at the spiritual connection between humans and the environment. I'm so thrilled to be moderating this panel here today. And when I was reflecting on why this subject holds such an important place in my heart, it took me back to the beginning of Start the Wave and my own personal awakening, both spiritually and to the bleak reality of our disposable lifestyles and the climate crisis we face. And it really was these two things combined that created the catalyst for me taking action in my own life, which then birthed the seed of Start the Wave and has brought us here today. I think, if I had known that we'd be here having this conversation today back then, I don't think I would have believed it. I so appreciate you taking the time to discuss the necessity of us recognizing our interconnectedness with the planet before it's too late. This subject really gives me hope, and I really believe that holding space for conversations like this one is integral in deepening our understanding and opening our minds. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your stories and your perspectives and your insights, and for everyone at home to be equally as inspired. Okay, so enough from me, over to Artie.
Hi, I'm Artie. I'm in Central Valley of California in Clovis. We are co-sponsors with this group. We're the United Religions Initiative. And I was reflecting back on what I would say. And 25 years ago, Bill Swing was asked by the UN to gather all the religious leaders together because they could agree to incredible things across the board, but then the religious leaders would go and make it their own. Well, he took a lease out on his home or whatever it's called and traveled the world to talk to the religious leaders. And he knew he was talking to the final one that made the difference was he talked to the Pope at the time, and the guy said, "I love it, but I want to run it." And that wasn't what he was doing. So he came back, he reorganized, and he went and talked to the people on the ground that were actually doing the work. And that's how it started, because we are grassroots. What you're doing here, now, for me, I got involved in 98. And so and in 2000, we actually incorporated as a 501(c)(3). 20 years ago, we couldn't even do this. It was not possible to be able to talk to people around the world and see your faces. Okay, myself personally, there was so much that I didn't know. And as it has grown into this incredible over 1 million people around the world doing the very work that you're talking about all the different, it's unbelievable. But for me personally, to be able to be here and sit with you, the change makers of this now, has been thrilling and an honor for me. So each of you are pivotal in this whole thing, the movement that we're doing. So thank you. We are so glad that we can be a part of this. Thank you. And whoever's next.
Thank you, Artie. It's me. So hi, everyone. My name is Geneva Blackmer, and I'm the Program Director for the Interfaith Center, located at the Miami University campus in Oxford, Ohio. The Interfaith Center is a safe, welcoming interfaith space, inviting our local and global communities to engage in dialogue, education, and service. Our mission is to invite people from diverse religious, spiritual, and secular traditions to participate in each other's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and friendships. We seek to unify people of all faiths and no faith around common moral, social, and ethical concerns in order to build a more just and equitable society. We consider environmental justice to be an intrinsic part of this mission, recognizing that environmental degradation not only compromises our collective life on this planet, but also exacerbates social inequalities and contributes to the ever-growing refugee crisis. The beautiful wisdom of our religious, spiritual, and secular traditions can guide us to recognize our responsibility as environmental stewards and restore our reverence and awe for the divine in nature. I'm humbled to welcome you all here today with the utmost gratitude for all of our panelists and our partnership with Start the Wave and URI North America, who allowed this conversation to flourish. And with that, I'm gonna hand it back over to you, Dom.
Fantastic. All right, well, without further ado, we are going to hear from Tom Bailey first. Tom Bailey is an energy and climate expert with 14 years of experience writing climate strategies and policies for governments, cities, businesses, and NGOs. He has also been practicing Dzogchen Tibetan Buddhist meditation for 20 years and is currently working with an organization called The Jump, part of which considers the personal and inner transformation needed to address our ecological meltdown. Over to you, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Dom. And firstly, a massive thanks to everybody who's been involved in putting this on. Like, this is the theme of this event is really the most important and frankly beautiful thing I can imagine talking about. So I'm going to really enjoy this. So thank you, everybody. So what the question I was set was, what motivated me to start The Jump and to found The Jump? Well, that is a recognition, right? A recognition that to avoid ecological meltdown, the science is very clear. Right, that we need an inner transition, a deep inner transition, a transformation in our mindsets and our cultures. Okay, and that very luckily our wisdom traditions from around the world offer us very powerful tools to be able to make that transition. So that is a recognition that's transformed my life recently. And in response to that recognition, I'd like to also offer you all an invitation to take the jump. So that's a summary, but how did all this happen? So since the age of 11, I've known I wanted to work on behalf of the environment. And so for my career, I've been working as an engineer, as a consultant, as a head of research, working on technology changes like green energy, energy efficient buildings. And then recently we did a research project that was a collaboration between Leeds University, a consultancy and a big NGO. And it showed us basically that these tweaks I've been working on, technologies, policies, things like that, will never be enough. Okay, you can do all the new technologies and all the policies you like, but as long as our society is focused on ever more stuff, it can never keep up. Right, and this was a shock to me. After 15 years of telling this story, I realized it wasn't true. Okay, and in fact, the research showed that we must reduce the impact of consumption in wealthy parts of the world by 2/3 in just 10 years. Okay. And it also showed that individuals and communities have a massive part to play in that. So that's the really good news, right? And the question for that, obviously, is how? And hopefully you can all see this image. These are some of the 6 recommendations that came out from the report that everybody needs to make. I'm not going to go through them now, but just to give an example, Holiday Local invites us to fly just once every 3 years, short haul, and once every 8 years, long haul. And this is what the science says that we all need to do. And if we're doing it, these 6 shifts, then we're doing what the environment needs. No more fads, no more confusion, just real deal science. And so with this new information, I left my job. And me and some friends headed in a new direction and set up this new grassroots movement called The Jump, which launched only a few weeks ago. And it invites people to take the jump, which means to try these 6 shifts for 1, 3, or 6 months. And then we offer the community, the tools, and hopefully the good vibes to help people along the way. So far, so good, right? But all of this like begs a pretty big question. Like, if these shifts are so important, why are they so hard, right? And that's because to take them, we have to swim upstream against our society's systems, its cultures, its mindsets, its behaviors, all of which are currently designed and focused on more consumption, right? And for example, the prevailing mindset around the world at the moment is that happiness is not to be found within us, right? It's out there in the world amongst all the things that I have to compete with each other and fight to get hold of, right? And if I get 10 times more of that stuff, I get 10 times more lasting happiness, you know, and that is the foundation really of the way that our world works right now. And it's just physiologically, it's simply not true. 10 times more stuff doesn't make me 10 times more happy. That's not the way our brain simply works, right? So like, it's factually incorrect, like as a route of becoming happy and as a way of organizing ourselves and seeing reality. It's like we're under some sort of spell or like a confused dream, right? And the question is, how on earth do we wake up? And this is where, like, for the first time, 2 huge parts of my life, work, sustainability and environment, and meditation and inner journey, come crashing together and now occupy the same space. And that's because the wisdom traditions, of which Buddhism is one, and I've been practicing with that for about 20 years, they offer so many tools and views to help us with this exact problem, right? In a very real, practical and ordinary way. So first, they help point us in a more sensible direction, frankly, and then they give us the tools to be able to move there and to be able to get on with it and progress. And an example of a sensible direction is to put wisdom and kindness at the heart of our lives, right? And an example of wisdom that often comes up in Buddhism is recognizing the deep truth of impermanence, for instance, right? That everything passes. No matter how hard you try and hold on to things, grasp at them, try and make the world, safe for you, everything passes, everything changes, right? That's just the way the world works. Look at all the evidence of history. And so when you really connect with and accept this obvious and unavoidable fact, naturally, you stop grasping at stuff so much. You start to relax. You start to feel much better. And all of this undermines these foundations of consumerism. Another is like compassion and kindness. Right? If wisdom is how we see the world, kindness is how we relate to it. And if we engage with others generously, we quickly become disinterested in amassing a great pile of stuff and in dominating the world and each other so that we can get it. And when we take joy in other people's happiness, we just start to feel so much better, don't we? Again, undermining consumerism. And you might say, fine, great, this all sounds very nice, yeah, but how on earth do we do any of this in the modern world? Well, again, these traditions offer so much, right? And individually, I mean, my experience, meditation and the teachings, Buddhism have helped establish a daily life practice that really is kind of like going to the gym for your love and your compassion and for your wisdom. Daily, you can nurture it and it becomes real, and then that's on your own, but also together, rituals, ways of celebrating and coming together that don't involve stuff that actually nurture a better way of living. So yeah, so there's so much on offer. And to conclude, basically, I mean, all of a sudden, these lenses and tools that these wisdom traditions offer us, have become much more than just a way of improving our lives. To me, it's clear the science demands that we find a 21st century way of putting these into practice, not just to make us happy, but simply as a way of surviving, of dealing with this climate crisis, as I've outlined. And so this is why, I mean, the jump has got 5 tools in it that help us make the transition, right? And one of them we call Deepen, and it basically is aimed at addressing exactly these sorts of things. It's brand new, and we've not developed it much yet, but we're starting to hold events and spaces for people to come together to discuss this sort of stuff, and then very hopefully soon workshops and events from notable teachers and stuff. So basically I want to finish with saying, inviting you all to take the jump, to get involved in this great experiment. It's www.takethejump.org. And I look forward to seeing you all there and also talking to everybody after this. So thank you very much, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. And we've already shared the jump on our social, so you can also go through there to find the amazing work that Tom's doing. And we will continue to support you and wish you all of the best of luck, Tom, in this wonderful venture that you are embarking on. Okay, so next up we have Mike Roman, a former Kiribati Peace Corps volunteer, Fulbright Fellow, co-creator of the social media platform Humans of Kiribati, and author of When There Was No Money, received his PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Pittsburgh. His dissertation, Migration, Transnationality and Climate Change in the Republic of Kiribati, was turned into a 2018 Sundance selection, Anote's Arc. He has spent the last 20 years raising global consciousness of our planet's climate crisis from the front lines. Over to you, Mike.
First off, thank you everyone for having me, and congratulations to you, Dominique. You said Anote perfectly.
Oh, yay. Fantastic.
I'm going to start my story with talking about what got me into where I am today, and that not really being my connection of my Catholic faith and background, even though Pope Francis has written the encyclical on the environment, that wasn't the thing that connected me, because my journey started a long, long time ago. When I was little, my dad would always take me to church to do some kind of service, whether it was making meals for the homeless or packing Christmas baskets for those that didn't have the money or the means to have a Christmas celebration. From the young age, I was always attracted to service. So it was pretty predictable that I would dedicate myself to some kind of service when I graduated high school, college, graduate school. My life is a life of service. So at Miami University, I went in and interviewed for the Peace Corps. I told the person that was interviewing me that I was allergic to fish, hated hot weather, and was severely prone to motion sickness, especially on boats. I was sent to the Central Pacific Island nation where there is nothing but fish, heat, and boats for 2000 to 2002, for 2 years, from 2000 and 2002. On my first week there, now I have to explain to you what Kiribati is. It's a Central Pacific coral atoll nation. It is one of the first nations predicted to vanish in the planet because of climate change, with elevation of maybe just 1 to 3 feet for English, for American measurements, or 1 meter for the rest of the world. So it's very low lying. It's centered on the 4 corners of the planet. It's the only nation to have territory in the northern, southern, western, and eastern quadrants of the Earth. It is literally where the day starts and predicted to be one of the first to disappear. I lived and worked there for a while, and I'm still living and working there remotely. We went through droughts that lasted months. I've seen oceans rise over villages. My adopted father from Kiribati is living without his home village. It's been under the ocean for more than 15 years. My entire time there, and I include up till this very day because I still work with the nation, has been something that has changed my life drastically. I am still a servant. I am still fighting for their nation, my nation, and our world. I left service in 2002. The day I left service was the day that my commitment to the country ended, but it was also the day that my commitment to the nation began. Leaving service was hard. I didn't want to leave. And I wasn't done. My time wasn't done. Since then, I've been working in academia. I've been teaching. I've been working around the world, talking at the UN and the Pacific, partnering with nations all around the world, just to tell the world that we exist for however long we exist, in our country. Yesterday was the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015. With great fanfare, we celebrated, but we knew that no matter what would happen, our chances of survival would still be pretty slim to none. We say 1.5 to survive because that is what we need. But we have to humanize climate change because the science hasn't been working as fast as it needs to work for my family, for my friends, to stay on this planet longer than the next 10 years. We realize that we're not going to change the world, but we want the world to change for us and for those other nations, Kiribati, Tokelau, Marshall Islands, Maldives, and Tuvalu. We are the human faces of climate change, and we don't want this to happen to anyone else. Thank you so much for inviting me here, and I want to leave it open to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I had a little look online at some of the links that you had sent over, and I was unaware before of Kiribati, honestly, before finding your work, and I highly recommend everybody make sure to go out. We're building up our resources page, and we'll make sure to put your TED Talk and various other links up on there so that people can have access to it. In terms of the film that was made from your dissertation, Anote's Ark, I found the trailer, but is there a space that we can actually watch the entire film at this time, or is it, yeah, I'd like to speak to that.
So the dissertation topic was turned into the movie, but it wasn't based off of my dissertation.
Right.
Anote is, I guess, an adopted relative of my family. So he is the former president of the nation of Kiribati. I Still Film made that film, and it was released in 2018. It was in the Sundance Film Festival, and sorry, that's my timer, just not to go over.
Bless you. I asked the question, so you're doing absolutely fine.
So it was released in 2018, and it traveled the world. Right now, another film that I helped develop is released around the world. It's touring the world virtually right now. It's called One Word. It's about the Marshall Islands. And my goal is to have a film out by every nation that's in danger. And so we have the underwater president. I wasn't any part. I didn't have anything to do with that. But that is on the Maldives. The Marshall Islands is One Word. Anote's Ark is Kiribati. When the pandemic, we want to do one on Tuvalu, and we want to do one on Tokelau. That is my ultimate dream, and we're not stopping.
Wonderful. Well, I'll make sure to get all of the relevant details so that we can get it out to our community and anyone who is interested. Okay, now we are on to Randy Ramdeen. Randy Ramdeen is a queer woman of colour, an activist and advocate for human, animal and environmental rights. She was a regional officer for the Green Party of Canada, election organiser for the Green Party of Ontario, and campaign manager in the 2019 federal election for the Green Party of Canada leader, Annamie Paul. Although she was raised Catholic, Randy now identifies as atheist, and rather than subscribe to organised religion, her faith lies within spirituality and the connection between herself, the planet, and all its inhabitants. Over to you, Randy.
Thanks, Dom. So yeah, my story is a little bit like an IKEA floor plan. It's confusing, but we'll get there. So I was raised Catholic. I was baptized when I was 3 years old in Trinidad. I had my first communion when I was 7, and I was confirmed at 12. But throughout that time, I never really felt connected to the religion, even though my first job was at the parish center as well. And when I tell people later just how Catholic I was, I went to Catholic school from kindergarten until I went to college. And I had a nun as an elementary school principal. So it was pretty Catholic, but it was just life for me. That's just how it was. But I didn't realize quite how much Catholicism played a big part of my life because I didn't feel connected to it. And when I realized that I was queer, I felt even more disconnected with it. So when I was in grade 12, I took a world religions course, and I was like, maybe I can find something in here. Maybe I can feel a little more connected. And I actually felt a draw to Judaism. And so I started learning a little more about Judaism and felt, maybe this is the place for me. And coincidentally, when I was in college, I met a girl online who happened to be Jewish. And we started dating, and she ended up moving to Chicago, and we stayed together. And so I actually had the opportunity to go to Chicago quite often and for good lengths of time. And we celebrated Hanukkah and a couple of Seders, and yeah, it felt really good. And then one night we were watching a movie called Trembling Before God. And if anyone's seen it, it's about queer Orthodox Jews who really struggle in the community and with their religion. And I was like, okay, maybe Judaism isn't for me. And so I just kept searching, and I got to know my then partner's schoolmates very, very well. She went to Purdue University for couple and family therapy. And one of her schoolmates was Mormon. And I used to love sitting with him and talking about it. And I just kept my mind open to what he had to say. And then one day my partner came home and she said, so-and-so said something really interesting in class. And it was, I'm really struggling with my religion right now. My religion tells me that being gay is wrong. And I look at Randy and my partner, and I think, how could that possibly be wrong? And so I just was like, okay, maybe everyone struggles with their religion, and maybe organized religion isn't the place for me. And then something really cool happened. An organization called Christian Organization Relief Effort reached out to Purdue University students and their partners and said, would you like to come to work with survivors of Hurricane Katrina? And so we were all on board with that. So the students obviously went there to provide emotional support. But we also went and we cleaned and sanitized homes and delivered water. So we went all around Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and in Biloxi. And a couple of things happened on that trip to really change my perspective. One thing that happened was we met this woman named Joanne, and she had been to what she called cancer camp twice. She had a tracheotomy, so she had a little voice box, and she lost her entire home. She was staying in a trailer with the door had flown off, and FEMA came to visit her and said, would you like another trailer? And she said, no, I'm fine. Give it to someone who actually needs it. And I just thought, wow, this woman is incredible. After all she's been through, she's just so incredible. And so we helped her as best we could and invited her over to the church that we were staying in. But one moment that we had that I'll never ever forget is she said, can we pray together? And so there was a group of us, probably about 6 of us. And so I know a bunch of us weren't religious, so we were hesitant. And so we did it anyway because she's just so wonderful. And we stood in the circle and held hands, and she just prayed. And in that moment, what I felt was a spiritual connection to a human being, to human beings. And I was like, this is the moment. This is what I've been searching for, is not something that I am trying to force. It's just a natural connection with human beings. And then when we got back to the church that night, we did a debrief, and I had my first guided meditation, because they knew that that was important for what we had just gone out and experienced, the emotional toll it took on seeing all those people being displaced and whatnot. So that day specifically was a really moving, really important day for me. And then another moment, the second moment that I had, was when we were traveling from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, which is a very vibrant, very nice little area, the very developed area, to Biloxi. And Biloxi was highly racialized, low income area. And the difference from what seemed like devastation and support was night and day. Biloxi was completely ruined. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to see the disaster that the hurricane had caused. And it was heartbreaking to see how it didn't seem like there was the same amount of support that was given to Ocean Springs. So I took those thoughts, I took those two experiences, and I came back to Canada, and I just decided to look up as much as I could, research as much as I could on the impacts of climate change and environmental justice and environmental racism. And when I was doing my research, I came across this book called The Politics of Pollution. And in that book, it discusses how before the Confederation of Canada, which is in 1867, the powerful people knew about pollution and how it was affecting the environment, and basically didn't care. They wanted to just make money. And so it was that moment that I was like, okay, I don't know how, but I'm going to start being active and I'm going to make change somehow. So I, started getting involved in the Green Party, and I put my money where my mouth is, and I ran as a candidate 3 times, and I worked for the party and did all that stuff. And then I got involved in an amazing organization. It works for positive change, called Start the Wave. And here I am, but I do everything in my life to make change. And whether that's small change, starting with changing your soap in your house to be biodegradable to protect the sea life, or, being at pipeline protests, there's anything that you can do. And, we do what we can. So when we know better, we do better. So yeah, that's my story.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Randy. That was super interesting, and I have many follow-up questions for another day. Wonderful. Thank you for your share. Okay, so now we have David Loy. And David Loy is a professor, writer, and Zen teacher in the Sanbo Zen tradition of Japanese Zen Buddhism. His most recent book is Eco-Dharma, Buddhist Teachings for the Ecological Crisis. See www.davidloy.org for more information on his work. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Dominique. Thinking about today, it seems to me that it would be more interesting, that, rather than talking about my own life, saying a little bit about the life of the Buddha, because he had this truly extraordinary relationship with the natural world, especially trees. According to the traditional stories, he was actually born in a grove of trees, Lumbini Grove, when his mother went into premature labor. And then there was a very famous incident when he was just a very young child, where he was sitting under a tree, spontaneously went into a kind of meditative samadhi or trance. And later, when he left his palace on his spiritual quest, where did he go? He went into the forest, where he studied with a couple teachers, did his ascetic practices, and finally ended up meditating, and we believe had this great awakening sitting under another tree, a Bodhi tree next to a river. And even after that, it wasn't as though he sort of went back and lived in the city. He continued to live outside. For the most part, he taught outside. And when he died, he actually died outside as well, which I think is quite striking. He had this deep, obviously there was something deep there. And, you know, we may wonder, those of us who are Buddhists today, we tend to have it a lot more comfortably. We sit in, you know, rooms with windows and screens so that we can control the temperature and the rain and the insects and so forth. But we may also wonder, is there something that's lost? Are we missing something? And something that in fact I think is found not only in Buddhism, but if you think about the story of Jesus, what did he do after his own baptism by John the Baptist? He actually went out into the desert, right? Into the wilderness, fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. And if I remember correctly, Muhammad, who, you know, the Quran was something that was sort of given to him by, I think, the Archangel Gabriel when he was off by himself communing in a cave. So there is this suggestion that, you know, many of the great spiritual founders have this deep connection with the natural world. And I think the question for all of us, you know, not only for our religions, but for us as a now global civilization, what does that mean? What can we learn from it? In the Buddha's case, there's this interesting story that he once had a dream where the spirit of a tree came to him and complained that one of the monks had actually cut down its tree, in order to make a little hut. And it's interesting how the next morning the Buddha gathered the Sangha, the monks together, and made a new rule. He said that monastics are not allowed to cut down trees or even a living branch or even pluck a green leaf from a bush. All of which I think suggests an incredible sensitivity to the natural world that, you know, to a large extent we've lost today. When we think about Buddhism, obviously the Buddha didn't face the kinds of challenges that we do today. In other words, when you go back to the original teachings, the Buddha doesn't have anything to say about carbon emissions or rising sea levels and that. But nonetheless, there are a lot of really interesting sort of implications built into the teachings. One of them that is, I think, especially interesting to me is that there does seem to be a kind of a parallel between what Buddhism has always said about our individual predicament and our collective predicament today, in the sense that from a Buddhist point of view, you can understand that the fundamental problem is, this is one way to say it, the fundamental problem is our sense of separation. That we have a sense of ourselves as somehow inside, and that other people and the rest of the world are outside. And therefore, in some sense, our own well-being is separate from their well-being. I'm fascinated by the fact that it really seems to be the situation we're facing now in terms of how it is that our human global situation, civilization, that we feel so separate from the rest of the natural world, that we feel that we can exploit it because we're separate from it. We can use it for our own benefit. So in both cases, it seems to be that the fundamental problem is this sense of separation, and the fundamental, and if that's also, we can say, a kind of spiritual problem that we face today, then it really does raise this question: what can we do to overcome this sense of separation? What are the practices? When you look at Buddha's teachings, again, they don't give us a lot of help in terms of specifically what we should do today. They, you know, there's a variety of things that I think we need to be creative about. You know, some people work on individual carbon footprint, other ones work on sort of passing a carbon tax in Congress. Some other people, including myself, work with groups like Extinction Rebellion, realizing that direct action, civil disobedience is probably going to be necessary. But if I can just conclude by pulling out what I think is the single most important sort of Buddhist implication, and it's the idea of the Bodhisattva path, which in Buddhism is basically the understanding that when we look for spiritual awakening, we shouldn't do it just for our own individual well-being. We should do it to help everyone as well. And I think that's the challenge we face today. I think that not only Buddhism, but I think religion in general needs to reconfigure itself. Not only do we need to see through the idea that the goal is to somehow escape or transcend this world, but we also need to realize that it's not enough to focus on what we think promotes our own well-being. We also need to look at the larger picture and bring together the kind of personal or individual transformation that Buddhism has always emphasized with the kind of social, collective, institutional transformation that's necessary today. And I think the really exciting thing that's happening, certainly in Buddhism, but I would say in many other religions as well, is the realization how these two transformations are dependent upon each other, that each requires the other if it's going to be as successful as we need it to be. Now, Dominique, I've lost track of the time, so it's probably time for me to stop, right? Should I leave it at that?
It's up to you. Do you feel like you have come to the end of your share, or would you? Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful the things.
Well, one very quick point. Buddhism traditionally doesn't talk about good versus evil. Buddhism traces our problems back to greed, ill will, and delusion. And traditionally, these have been understood in an individual way. But I think we're in a situation now where we can see, actually, these aren't only individual problems, they're actually institutionalized. In the modern world, we've institutionalized them. To be quite frank, I think consumer corporate capitalism, at least the way it's functioning now, insofar as you always want more and more, whether it's more consumption, whether it's more profits, higher stock prices, market share, whatever. It's always this need to keep growing if you're not going to collapse. And from a Buddhist point of view, why is more and more always better if it can never be enough? I mean, I think that's one example, but we could see it with the others as well, that the challenge we're facing is not simply working on our own individual greed, ill will, delusion, but to see how these have taken collective, institutional, social form in the world and working together with other people to try to address them. So maybe I'll leave it at that for the moment. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, so we are now on to some questions that are coming through from those watching at home. So the first question will be for Tom. I work for a local government. How do we push our local public agencies to start making changes internally that will spur environmental awareness and environmentally friendly practices?
Good question. So, I mean, I've seen research that's shown that cities are responsible for all of the savings we need to get to a climate safe place. Cities or local authorities, action at the local level, government level, could be responsible for up to 30% of the savings we need, right? So mayors and local authorities actually have huge influence, and there's lots that they can do, and therefore there's lots that we should want to push, that we can push them to do. Transport, buildings, green space, and in some places energy. It really does change by local authority what they have influence over. But I mean, I think the best ways to push them, and there's all sorts of things. But I mean, I think obviously civil disobedience and protesting and the XR kind of stuff is really key. But really, one thing I want to say is that actually, at the moment, even if they were to do all of those things, it would still be a long way off enough. And there was some research we saw recently, right, but that was really insightful around this question. If you were to ask yourself right now, where in the world looks like the future, right? What place looks like, like if we haven't gone to part and the planet's saved, like where looks like that now. So you think, oh, it's places with like green energy and lots of public transport and like energy efficient buildings, and everyone's kind of cycling on their bikes and it's all green and lovely. Do you think about places like Copenhagen, Oslo, Portland in America, these places that have actually got really low local emissions? They've kind of done a lot of what the local authority, exercised a lot of the local authority's power. Great progress, great credit to them. Their emissions locally are down to 2 tons a person. Right, and we need to get them to 1 ton pretty much, and most cities are up at 5, 10, 15. So the great work on these places for that, but that's only their local emissions. When you look at their global emissions, some of these cities go from 2 to 20 tons. They go from being the best places in the world to actually the most intensive. All right, so this tells us the whole story of what progress where we're working towards, what the example is we're trying to emulate, turns it on its head. So I would invite whoever asked this question that the most powerful thing is to start trying to embody that real future, and start moving away, because the reason those places are really high impact is because of the consumption. Copenhagen also tends to be very wealthy, lots of flying, lots of eating meat, lots of investments around the world, redoing your house every couple of years because you can afford it. Stop that, and start living in touch with your local, environment, and work less and connect with what makes life good. And because there's nowhere we can point at right now that is the future we need to live in. So to start creating examples of that, little pockets of that in our communities, I would say is the most important thing we need to do right now. And then that will filter up, and our local authorities, our systems, our cultures will change, and then our local authorities will know what to do. So yeah, that's a slightly curveball answer, but there you go.
No, beautiful and so important to all observe our place within what's going on right now, and like you say, if we start by embodying that, that inevitably influences other people to also get on board. And thank you very much, Tom. Okay, so the next question is for Mike. What can we do to help these countries get fresh water, food, and basic needs met in order to survive? What can we do, Mike, as people watching here today, after hearing your heartbreaking stories about the Kiribati?
The great thing about COVID-19, if there is anything great about COVID-19, is that it forced us to not rely on external imports. And so Kiribati closed its borders in, I want to say, mid to late March, and I was supposed to go back. There's been thousands of us stranded in Germany, in the USA, in Australia, in New Zealand, and we're still quote unquote COVID refugees. But what that's made us do in the country, people do in the country, is grow things like they have grown for thousands of years before. Rely on the natural environment, do things the way that they were done before. Fresh water, without going into a geological explanation of coral atoll lenses and the aquifers that form and desalinate the salt water due to the coral, there is fresh water. There is ways to get water on those islands. People have done it for thousands of years. Kiribati, archaeological evidence shows that there were people in Kiribati 2,000 years ago. So we know how to live, we know how to survive. One thing that really connects us is the word Abba means people, it means land, it means community, all in one. When you are born on that island, you live on that island, you grow up on that island, you have children of your own on that island, and when you die, you return to the island. And you watch over the island for future generations that will come after you. It's cosmologically connected. The past, the present, and the future is all connected to land. So when we talk about the land disappearing, we're also talking about a people disappearing. And my Kiribati parents will not leave that land because they are attached to that land. So the land takes care of us. and we take care of the land. But what is happening outside of Kiribati is impacting us. And that's one thing that we cannot control, that people cannot control. We leave that up to the rest of the world. It's baby steps for baby feet. I can almost guarantee that no one heard of Kiribati or even knew how to pronounce Kiribati before I said Kiribati. Everyone would think it was Kiribati, while the T and the I make the S sound. So it's Kiribati. Get a bus if it's too hard to pronounce. And just say get a bus really fast and we'll understand. So it's these little steps that we're trying to take while we still can take. Fresh water, medical supplies, all that stuff is great. But we live in a place, and I'm thinking of Tamana, thinking of the other islands, where money is not the currency. People are the currency. That's how you survive. You survive with people. You survive with the land.
Mm. So spreading the word then is what I'm hearing, talking about Kiribati, making people aware that there is a place that is really feeling, I mean, there are many places in the world, but truly feeling like the devastating effects of climate change firsthand and shedding light on that, having conversations and doing the work where we are in order to try and reduce the effects of what our actions are, how they are impacting other places in the world. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
It's powerful. Governments are very, very powerful. And I have worked, during the past 4 years, I've worked with the United States Congress and the Senate. And things have been happening in the halls of Congress and the tunnels of Congress that give me hope. That give me hope for things like amendments or things like Senate resolutions for displaced populations put forth by a senator from Vermont and co-sponsored in the House by a senator by a congresswoman from New York City. And when I go up to DC, I'm in conversation with these people, and they have never heard, like everyone on this call, most likely, they have never heard of these situations happening on the other side of the planet. So stories can do a huge amount of good, and they can inspire people to work for justice for those that don't have a voice, and tell our story. We love where we live. We love the world that we are in. And my family doesn't want to leave.
Thank you. I realized that I forgot to say that we were supposed to have the lovely Winona LeDuc on our call here today. But unfortunately, she's protesting, and due to some complications with line 3, she is not able to make it here today. So we are sending all of our love and positivity out to her wherever she is right now. So, okay, back to the questions. We have a question for Randy. Did you find being brought up in Catholicism easier for you to search for answers outside it?
Yes, in the sense that I never, like I said before, I never really felt connected to Catholicism. When we would go to church, like the stories just didn't penetrate for me. You know, when I went to my retreat at a convent for my confirmation, I was like, this is a great place to party. That's what I was thinking about, instead of feeling that connection. And like I said, when I got a bit older and realized realized that I was queer and realized the views of Catholicism at the time were very anti-queer. It was easy for me to search for answers elsewhere because I didn't fit in. I definitely didn't fit in anymore in that. But I'm always searching for answers, and I'm always open to listening to people. Like one of my best friends is Baptist, and I love listening to her. And while I don't believe, like I said, in organized religion, I love listening to people who have faith and to see how much that faith has affected them and inspires them to make change. And I keep an open mind, like I said, and there's actually this church in Toronto that I go to with my friends called Gay Church because it's super inclusive and we really learn good lessons from it. And so I'm not anti-religion by any means. I'm constantly open to, receiving the messages that I can get in really good spaces, and that's a really good space to get it. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, question for David now. Can you clarify how Buddhism reconciles, I'm going to start that again. Can you clarify how Buddhism reconciles the idea of impermanence and a non-transcendental view of the world?
Usually when we think about religion, we're looking for some kind of permanence, something real and unchanging, like God, for example, and sort of hoping to sort of ground ourselves in that. And in that regard, I think Buddhism is quite strikingly different in the way that it emphasizes impermanence and embracing impermanence. So, in Buddhism, it's a big tent. So there are people who would understand the goal in Buddhism as some kind of complete transcendence of this world. But certainly in the tradition Zen that I trained in, I think for a lot of other Buddhists as well, what we need to transcend is really our ego, the delusion of a me that's separate from the world, and my well-being is separate from your. That's the problem. And by letting go of that, opening up to the impermanence. And for Buddhism too, impermanence is very much connected with another essential teaching, which is insubstantiality, which is a fancy word just to say that nothing has any separate reality of its own. Everything is interdependent. Everything is connected with other things. And so what this ends up emphasizing is that the life for a mature Buddhist practitioner is open to the impermanence and also responding appropriately according to situations because of that. So that's the emphasis. And of course, what's uniquely challenging about our situation today is the ecological crisis, not even just the climate emergency, but the larger one, the fact that there's so many species disappearing, so many pollutants in the air and the earth and our bodies and so forth. And so the question really is, how do we respond appropriately to that? And it's because I think Buddhism doesn't get preoccupied with escaping the world, but rather trying to address its problems. I think that's moving in the kind of direction that we really need. Religions have a kind of a checkered history in the sense that a lot of times they've ended up emphasizing we're unique, we're special, we're separate from all the other creatures, our well-being, they're all here for us. And I think rather than continuing down that road, all of our religious traditions really need to ask ourselves, how do we need to transform our understanding in ways that will help us engage more fully with the kinds of crises that we have today? Because if we can't do that, our religions are going to be irrelevant, and we don't want that to happen. Yeah.
Absolutely. So this is a question for the whole panel, anyone who feels called to answer. How can we motivate others to see how small behavioral changes can have an impact and have an important and widespread positive impact for the environment? Does anyone feel called to answer?
Yeah, if I can say just very briefly, 2 points. Number one, I think the best way to motivate other people is to set a good example. You know, it's really, I mean, words are cheap, right? It's all very easy to talk about what we should be doing. If we can set a good example, especially a non-consumerist one, because as Tom was saying, you know, so much we identify more consumption with more happiness. And if we can show that, you know, not being focused on this consumerist religion, if in fact that makes one even happier, more joyful, more free, I think that example is really important. But the other thing I'd want to add to that is, although reducing our own carbon footprint is important, I think it's important not to buy into what sometimes the large corporations want us to think, that that's the main problem. We also need to address the way the economic system is structured. And it's really important that our preoccupation with reducing our own footprint doesn't remove us from that. I remember Bill McKibben said at the Paris talks, you know, somebody asked him, what can I do as an individual? And he responded, stop being an individual. We have to work with others if we're really going to address this problem. Anyway, enough from me.
Absolutely. No, it's great. And I guess the question is, like, how do we join forces and come together, right? I mean, we have so many tools in order for us to do that now. The fact that we can have this conversation from all over the world and come together is remarkable. So I've been thinking a lot about how we can use the tools that are in place in order to create positive change and to make those connections and deepen our understanding through connection. Anybody else have any thoughts in regards to that? Yeah, Tom, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, just to reflect, I mean, you completely agree with everything David said there. I think the ones, you know, this, there is a lot of this, certainly in the environment movement at the moment, that there's a really firm sort of recognition of the responsibility that the big business has kind of put on individuals. Oh, it's you buying the wrong things. That's what's causing all this trouble. Then at the same time, I think like the science is really clear at the moment. Depending on where you live, 20 to 40% of the emissions, your personal per capita emissions, can be influenced. You are the primary influence over that. 20 to 40%. So right now you could take a massive chunk out. So there is an enormous impact we can have. And the science is basically really clear. We need all action from all actors right now. We don't have time to wait for business and then it's our turn. Everybody needs to be doing everything yesterday. So like so that just in terms of that messaging, it's really clear. And actually, you know, we do have real clear idea of what those things are now. And it's really important to get that out, because a lot of people are like, well, what about my recycling? Is that enough? And can I just offset my flights? And like, what if I just get the stairs rather than the lift? Is that enough? And it's like, or like, you know, soy milk, isn't that chopping down the rainforest as well? It's like, we just need clarity. And hopefully, you know, we're at the point now with the science where we know what they are, right? It's the diet, it's the flights, it's the, and just in terms of how we drive impacts, like, to me, you know, you could see the world, you know, the way our society in different chunks, right? There's the systems, which are the infrastructure, our politics, our economics. There's our cultures, which is how we organize ourselves together, how we relate to each other. There's our mindsets, which is our own experience, right? And these things are all equally important parts of the orbit, right? And often we focus just on system, but actually it's like until we change, like we've been talking about, you know, fundamentally what it is we strive for on our day-to-day basis. I mean, the example I always like to use is just like our celebrations. Look at all our celebrations, birthdays, the winter holidays, you know, baby showers, anniversaries. They all center around stuff now. Like, where is there a way that we come together and share, which doesn't? So I just think, you know, that's the sort of thing that we can start by doing. Let's create celebrations and come together where we don't buy things. You know, so yeah, I think there's just so much fertile ground for changing the way we live. And then that will start to filter up, because once you change those mindsets, enough people start to go, wow, that looks all right, actually. And then you get cultures change when enough people do that. And then the systems change. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So as we're, you know, heading into the holiday season, our family has spoken for many years about the necessity to to remove presence from the equation or find alternative ways of doing it. But it always manages to creep in somehow, you know, because I think we're all so used to this being such an integral part of our celebrations. Do you have any alternative ways that you think that people can come together without the necessity for exchanging more stuff? And yeah, what could that look like? If anyone wants to.
Hell yeah. I mean, I think one of the first things as part of that journey is, you know, it feels viscerally good to buy stuff sometimes, right? You know, when you're fed up and you're like, oh God, I really screwed up today. What an idiot, Tom. And you're like, well, I'm going to make myself feel better. I'll go and buy something on Amazon, right? And you feel for like 5 minutes, it's a strong emotional reaction, right? And that is, you know, that's why consumer advertising is so powerful. It can harness that. And I think this is where like the practices that, you know, we talk about are really important, because you could just take a moment and just kind of sit through that and you know, to have almost like the sort of I don't know what the word is, but the psychological, the kind of meditative infrastructure to just kind of pass through that moment, you know. I think is a really important part of what we just described, because we do end up just buying something anyway. And then in terms of coming together, I mean, there's just so many things we could have just, you know, I think what's better than having you know, a gift doesn't have to be a thing. You know, there's all sorts of ways we can give things to each other, you know, find other ways. Our time is the biggest gift after all, isn't it? Just being that's the thing that the lockdown has taught us. When lockdown was lifted, we didn't think, oh my God, I need lots of cheap t-shirts. You were like, I want to see the people I love, right? Like that was the thing you crave. So,
absolutely.
So yeah, each other's time, I think, is the best thing.
Embracing that quality time, absolutely. Before I move on to another question, does anybody have anything else they'd like to add in regards to how small behavioural changes can have an important and widespread positive impact on the environment?
I'd like to add something on to what Tom was saying. It's people's nature to a certain degree to want to fit in. And Tom was saying, you know, when they see something, they're like, oh yeah, that actually looks pretty good. So the more people see the changes that other people are making, the way they're shifting their lives, the more they're going to want to start doing that themselves. And if I can get political for a moment, voting the right people in and changing policy. It's not a perfect system, but it's a system we have. And so I hope everyone on this panel runs for candidacy wherever they are to make some changes.
I'm definitely out of that. I can't see that being in my future, but
everyone here are the people we need to make changes.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so another question for the whole panel. What part do you feel organized religion plays in the need for ecological change needed today? So for the ecological change needed today. And how does it affect the impact needed for the change to either start or continue?
I think you don't make changes unless something happens to you personally, or you know someone who hasn't been impacted by that. And to that point, half of the country of Kiribati is Catholic, half of it is Protestant, and smatterings of Mormon, Baha'i, Muslim, Seventh-day Adventist, and throw something else out there. Being able to connect the call that we're making with religious organizations around the world, we were able to work with Pope Francis in putting together one of our pieces that, you know, putting together that movie. Because Anote is Catholic, I'm Catholic. We're all, my family, USA Kiribati is all Catholic. Being able to connect religions that connects millions, billions of people around the world and able to do something with that is almost is almost like social media on steroids. And I think the call to serve, the call to humble yourself, the call to work with each other, like Dr. Loy was saying, so many things of what he talked about in the Buddhist faith, I could feel reflected in my Catholic faith. So many things that he talked about within the Muslim faith that he reflected on the Buddhist faith. I could feel that in my Catholic faith, and parts of it in the Mormon faith that I'm learning about as well. So, I mean, we are all connected, and I think that's what an environmental movement does need, and a global connection to each other. And I think humanity is best when we face the worst, because that brings out the best in all of us.
Anyone else want to jump in? Yeah, go for it, David.
I think that our religious institutions are both part of the problem, a big part of the problem, and also an extremely important part of the solution. By part of the problem, I mean that, as I said somewhat earlier, I think that too often they have focused our attention elsewhere. They've talked about some other reality, some way of transcending this world, and therefore understanding the value of this world as simply kind of a means to some higher eternal end. I think insofar as our religions have encouraged us to do that, they have sort of been complicit in the kinds of degradation that have been happening. They've treated the earth as simply kind of a backdrop to this great story of salvation that will eventually involve us escaping somewhere else. But the other side of it is religions are so important in the lives of so many people, and also, you know, they're all big tents. They all have a lot of teachings, and I think the teachings about compassion, about kindness, about helping, it's like all of them in one way or another, they articulate it differently, but they're all talking about the problem of ego, of selfishness. They all point out what a problem that is. And I think by building on it and also understanding that selfishness can also happen on a collective level. You can have a species that's selfish in terms of how it relates to all the other species of the earth. These teachings are also built into our great religious traditions. And so I think there are these double aspects. We have to be wary of the problems and the ways that religion can sort of reinforce some of the negative turning away from this world, but also how at their core, the great founders, the great teachers exemplify and show us what it can really mean to let go of our egos and to become part of something greater than ourselves, whose well-being we identify with.
Beautiful. Yes, an ongoing journey of eliminating the ego, but it's so important. Anyone else want to jump in on that question before we move on? Not seeing any hands go up. Okay. To what extent is eco-consciousness yet another privilege of the privileged? Interesting question. Who'd like to take that first? No one.
I can go.
Randy, yeah.
This reminds me, it goes back to environmental racism and just having less access to information and to that knowledge. But also the difference between being in survival mode and being in a privileged state. So there are people who are literally just trying to survive, trying to put food on their table and feed their families. And they just don't have the bandwidth to be able to focus on those ways that they can, make change. It's just not in their capacity right now. And I think that's something that's really important for us to understand, that all of us right now are very privileged to be able to put thought into these things and to dedicate our time and ourselves to these things because we're not in survival mode. And I think that's just an important reminder for everyone.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said, Randy. Anyone else want to speak on that?
Maybe to add to that quickly, if that's right.
Yeah.
I think the corollary of privilege in this context is probably responsibility, right? I mean, we're doing a lot of engagement, part of the jump, to make sure this is a place for all voices. Utterly crucial. I mean, obviously the environment movement has not been. But also there's as was recognized there, I think it's really important to recognize that it's not everybody shares responsibility evenly. There's enormous economic inequality, and therefore there's inequality and responsibility. And a lot of outreach to certain communities here has been like, well, you cause this mess, you fix it and come back once you have, and I think, which is there's a lot of truth to that, so I think it's important that the space be much more compassionately held for everyone to be a part of it. But really, it's an invitation. And actually, if it ends up, being mainly the privileged sorting their mess out, then I think there's probably some justice in that.
Well said, Tom. Okay, this is a question for David. Just looking at the time, 3:15. I think we can continue going for a little longer if everyone is happy to do so. So this question's for David. Could you speak about how to bridge or translate the connections of eco-dharma with Christian perspective?
In a way, I hope that I've done that to some degree in some of the other comments that I've made, especially the last one, regarding the fundamental issue of what I think the founders were really pointing at. I mean, if we go back, to the original teachings of Jesus, what is he really pointing toward? Is it really a matter of transcending this world? Or if we look at the emphasis upon relating to other people and kindness, I mean, I see that as a kind of an essential teaching there. Yeah. I don't know that that's a very good answer or an adequate answer. I mean, the religions are so big that it's hard to sort of sometimes generalize about them in the way that I've been doing, but maybe that's the best I can offer for the moment.
Perfect. I think that's great. Coming back to the fundamentals of compassion and loving kindness that runs through all religions and spiritual ideas. I think from what I've learned personally, it is that which connects us all, whether we're talking about spirituality and religion or just as humans. It really feels like that is the energy that connects us all, and if we can really tap into that, we'll be able to find that common language.
And can we extend that beyond human beings? I mean,
yes, we can.
Can we extend it to other species? Can we extend it to ecosystems and indeed the whole biosphere? The earth isn't just our home where we happen to be living, it's our mother. And in a sense, we never, cut that umbilical cord. So how do we acknowledge that too is a way in which we are part of something greater than ourselves, and therefore we have a sense of responsibility to that.
Absolutely. So this last question here is for everyone, and it's an interesting one. The pandemic has reduced individual emissions, but online shopping has increased pollution from big tech. Besides not shopping, how can we hold big tech accountable for their impact?
Well, I could offer one quick thing then, what everyone thinks. In the jump, one of the shifts is end clutter, and basically the research implies that we should be keeping all electronics for at least 7 years. So only buy products where the supplier is providing you with a product that might last that long. I think it's super important.
Yeah. And how are people to know? What is the research that needs to take place when buying these products, right? Because there's a lot of lying that's going on in the world currently, which is they may promote something as being sustainable or something that will last, and then you get it through the post and it breaks virtually instantly. It's that's an interesting thing to think about in terms of how can we be more conscious buyers when we are consuming, conscious consumers.
Maybe that's a reflection about you were asking earlier about how is it we can all come together. There's so many of us around the world that are concerned about these things. Collaborating on that kind of and sharing that information is probably
absolutely
key.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's websites for it.
Yeah, definitely. There will be soon if there isn't already.
Would you mind if I spoke up on a couple of questions ago?
Of course, I'd love that. Love that, Mike.
This idea, and I had to look it up. I kind of had a feeling that I knew what it was, but I wanted to make sure that my definition was correct. And this idea of eco-consciousness, I think Randy said that it was for the privileged, but I would argue strongly against that it's not for the privileged only, because we are very conscious about what is happening to our water. We are very conscious about what's happening to our lands. We are very conscious about the funerals that we are doing for children that pass away, because the water has turned into this. I've had this water bottle for almost a decade now, but this was our well water. And when children drink this, they get diarrhea, they vomit, they end up dehydrating. And my family in Kiribati has buried children less than 2 years of age because of things like this. And this has been happening for a long time. So we are not unconscious to what is happening to the environment. Like I always say, it's not just the polar bears. We need to have our story heard too, because we we are receiving the water that's melting on the poles. And so while they are losing the tundra, we are losing our islands. Like I said, this story doesn't get told because no one's interested in hearing it. Until now, I hope. We don't have electricity. We don't have running water on Tanana. But yet we are facing one of the world's biggest challenges. And to a very, very, very large part, it is not the fault of the Marshall Islands, Kiribati, Tokelau, Tuvalu, or the Maldives.
Right. Absolutely. And I think going back to what Randy was saying, it's the responsibility of the privileged to make sure that we are addressing how our impacts affect people like yourselves in Kiribati and beyond. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to Mike's share, or back to the question on how we can hold the big techs accountable for their impact, or what needs to, as we're moving into this new world of a global pandemic and figuring out, new ways of living, new ways of doing things, like what we should be conscious of as we navigate this time and the shifts that are changing.
maybe I can speak a little more generally, if I can. And it's not just holding big tech accountable, but I think it's the larger issue. And I think Buddhism is, that's what I usually talk about. But I think Buddhism is just a kind of example here. I mean, the way that Buddhism traditionally focused on our own individual awakening, when it came to the West, it also tied into sort of American individualism, right? There's a lot of Buddhist groups where, leave me alone, don't distract me with all this social ecological stuff, because I'm focusing on my own enlightenment. And I think the big challenge, certainly for Buddhism, and I think for a lot of other organizations, a lot of other religious institutions, is the need to find ways to come together, right? Like I alluded to Bill McKibben, stop being an individual. If it's true that the three poisons that Buddhism talks about, greed, ill will, and delusion, are not just functioning individually, but they've been institutionalized, we really have to, we can't think of ourselves as lone rangers. We have to find ways to come together and to work together, and in order to address them. And ideally, I would think religious institutions are a great way, because in a religion, we come together in our beliefs, in our concerns, and that just seems kind of a natural way to create a kind of community that then understands and is able to act as a community, as a group, to address these deep-rooted collective problems. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the answer really isn't simply about you and me sort of signing online petitions, the sort that we get a dozen of every day, but it's actually finding ways to work, finding ways to be a part of a loving community where people are there for each other, who really want to support each other. And I think that's one of the main challenges for religion in general these days. And certainly if it's going to be relevant in helping to address these kinds of challenges that we have today.
Beautiful. Wonderful stuff. Does anybody have anything else they would like to add about, any of the things that we've covered, or just in general about eco-spirituality as a subject, and how, keeping it in the forefront of our mind and diving deeper is very necessary at this time, before I sign off?
Maybe just a quick, just follow on from what David was saying, just to recognize, the absolute, it's going to be so difficult for us to progress through this next civilizational bottleneck where we're basically setting fire to the raft that we're on. And, these traditions have the tools, right? If we can just present them in a way that kind of fits with the 21st century psyche, right? And I think that to me is the big question, and the thing that we would love to invite in that discussion, but also here everywhere, how can we bring that ancient wisdom to land in a way that today works? Because obviously we have to be honest, the religions, our traditions are, they're born of a time, and there is a sort of a reshaping that may be required in some ways, I feel. But that discussion I would love to continue having how we do that.
Beautiful.
Apologies for talking too much, but really, really briefly, I think something else religions can do is help us deal with our grief. Because I think, frankly, a big obstacle for a lot of us is that we're repressing our grief about what's happening. And when we do that, that sort of disempowers us. And one thing we're doing at our Eco Dharma Center here in Colorado that we've started is we not only meditate together, but we actually have exercises that can help us get in touch with that grief. Grief is different from despair, but we have to feel our grief, and that perhaps more than anything else can sort of bring us together. And that's something I think religions can play an important role. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, it's great. No, not at all. Never need to apologize for sharing. And last chance, anyone else want to say anything before I sign off? think we're good. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much to all of our speakers here today. Your shares have been so valuable, and I have no doubt that that the impact of this panel will be huge, both for our community and beyond. And to all those who are at home watching, thank you for taking the time out of your day to really listen with an open mind and an open heart. What I would say is just keep questioning and reflecting on all of the things that were mentioned in this panel, and see what resonates with you, and keep opening conversations about what you've learned, whether it be with loved ones or literally anyone who will listen. And together as guests of Mother Earth, we can take action, both small and big, turn the ship around and create a better future for all. So have a beautiful rest of your day, and bye for now.
Thank you, Dominique, and everyone else who arranged this panel. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Kamera pa rin kami.